discussion on children.
We invite all who would care to join us in the recitation of the Lord's Prayer, followed by a moment of silence. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. It is now 7 o'clock. Shelby City Council meeting is called to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please, Mr. Crum.
Mr. Robb.
Here.
Mr. Roberts.
Here.
Mr. Gates.
Here.
Mr. Martin. Mr. McLaughlin.
Here.
I'll now entertain a motion to excuse Councilman Martin.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Roberts and a second by Mr. McLaughlin to excuse Councilmember Martin. Discussion. Mr. Gates.
Mayor, not necessarily a discussion, but just an explanation. If one of my colleagues is absent because he's on a mission trip, as Mr. Robb has done, I will gladly vote to excuse the person in that case. If a member is called up by Uncle Sam to go serve in the Guard, do his duty, as Mr. McLaughlin has done, it's an honor to vote to excuse someone at that point. If a colleague's full-time job requires attention elsewhere, as happened a few months ago with Mr. Roberts, I'm glad to excuse a person, or for medical reasons, either themselves or their family. I don't have any problem voting excuse. For trips and vacations, I will not do that. Since I held your position 40 years ago, I have always planned my vacations around the first and third Mondays of the month.
Thank you. And I believe, according to Mr. Martin, this would be attendance at a family event, something of that nature from last week, or last meeting's explanation of his absence tonight. Any further discussion or comment? Roll call, please.
Mr. Robb.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Nay.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Yay.
The motion to excuse passes. Now I'll entertain a motion to dispense with the reading of the journal from January 3rd, 2022.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Roberts and a second by Mr. Robb to dispense with the reading of the journal from January 3rd, 2022. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Robb.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Yay.
The motion to dispense passes. In time for public comment, I see no one in the gallery for public comment. I have not received any items by email or letter. Is anyone else for public comment? Right, if not, we'll move right on then to reports from standing special committees. Finance and Personnel Committee, Councilman Gates.
Thank you, Mayor. The committee met last week, and eventually I'll get to the financial statement, but we discussed a number of things prior to doing that. The first item we discussed was the upcoming closure of PNC Bank. The intention is of the Finance Department to move monies likely to Park National Bank as of March 1st. The Finance Department has solicited other banks, Mechanics, First Federal, and Savista, The finance director reported that they do not seem interested in wanting the city's business. We were, as of last Thursday, awaiting a response from U.S. Bank. When we get to it, we'll see that they have quite a bit of the city's money already. It has somewhat a logistical advantage in that its office is but 2 blocks from City Hall. We also looked at the hospitalization fund and the possibility of a waiver of payment for 1 month. That would, if we do that, that would be about $130,000 savings across the board. There had been some knee replacements last year that the city was waiting for those costs to come through. And we'll probably make a decision at our February meeting as to whether we wish to waive a month's payment. Regarding some personnel matters, the Shelby Fire Department was doing initial interviews. There were 12 or 14 applicants. You had said there'd be a second wave of interviews this week. Fire Captain Bob Dean is planning to retire either in March or in April. And at the wastewater treatment plant, Al Bartosiak, who's an operator there, is looking at retirement. Of course, the big concern in the beginning of each year is the annual appropriations ordinance. We heard that information from utilities and the police department would be to the finance director this week. What we're looking at is replicating our model from last year where we had 2 half-day meetings rather than 1 full day. With 1 full day, I know that I was becoming, my brain was becoming numb by the end of the day, and it seemed to work much better to have 2 half-day sessions. The first one with utilities and streets, and then basically everything else, general fund and the others. A concern that's coming up this year has to do with the administrative fee for 2022. The utilities director has expressed some concern, and I hope I'm not putting words in his mouth, but concern about the large amount that is for the electric fund. It was in excess of $500,000 this last year, and I think the total amount, well, no, I know, we predicted $996,000 in the administrative fee into the general fund for last year. So the electric fund is carrying more than half of that weight. So, there's some concerns about equity, but there's also the overriding concern about that the general fund has to be in the black. So I plan to meet with the finance director and look at some possible, we'll say, variations on the theme of 5%. That's been our standard rule, with an exception of the city income tax fund. But that's in the works. We need to consider the that administrative fee. The general fund, people in the general fund, specifically those of us elected in this room, we provide services to the street fund, the health, water, utilities across the board. And so, there is an expectation that these funds that have their independent revenue pay for the services that are rendered by the general fund. So there'll be more on that. So, well, with that, let's take a look at the financial statement. We'll take a look at the last page, as we've done here. We're going to look at the income tax. If we look down at the bottom half, we can see that the income tax fund, income tax department brought in over $404,000 in December. That includes a single payment of $125,000, which was the fourth quarter estimation for a large business here in town. So, you know, that's extraordinary. But even if you take out that $125,000, that's still a very good amount to be bringing in so late in the year. We can see that for that December, looking at the 3-year average, it exceeds it by 57%. But again, that's because of that one particular estimation. Looking up at the top half there, we can see that income tax brought in 2021 slightly under $4.9 million. The finance director mentioned that it was $1 million more than expected. But again, because we've got 2 declarations that were extraordinary, and that's what bumped up the $1 million. We're happy to have it, but as we get back to the later on, we'll say, you know, why we need to be cautious about that extra $1 million. It's we may just be holding it temporarily. Well, with that, Mayor, let's take a look at the front page. You can see in the general fund, the cash balance as of the end of the year was slightly under $1.3 million. Encumbrances, only $35,000. The Deputy Finance Director is very good about canceling out these stray purchase orders. But even then, with cash of $1.26 million, that's very good. You can see what we began with, 1.3 at the beginning of last year. So the general fund is you know, in good shape, particularly when the prediction is that we would have a 7% drop in city income tax revenues in 2021. So the finance director's crystal ball was a little cloudy, but you know, we're happy for it, as opposed to the other way around, and then we would be moaning. We're going to look down and take a look at the income tax fund 220. The cash balance was $425,000. That will cover refunds. The last thing we want is to be in a situation where, let's say, the general fund would have to make a refund to the city income tax fund, so that could then pay a real refund to a tax payer. Normally that's $50,000. That's been the rule for years and years and years, that everything at the end of the month is cashed out or transferred except for the $50,000. So it is prudent on the finance director's part to keep a larger balance there to see what's going to happen with possible refunds. Going down to the park, you can see that there's a large encumbrance there of $114,000. That's for work at the tennis court. So that's, you know, normally we'd see a large encumbrance at the end of the year, and why wasn't that canceled out? Well, there's a reason, it's the tennis courts. Going down to the Fund 283, the local coronavirus fund, you can see that's zeroed out, and that was required to have been done. Capital improvements, line Fund 300, again, there's an encumbrance there for $115,000. That has to do with Mark's radios. So we know why that is there. The sewer fund, free and clear, beginning with $142,000. That's in pretty good shape. We should see this spring the more sewer revenue coming from the Tubi, because as I understand it, they will no longer be doing their own pre-treatment and discharging into the receiving water, but discharging into our sewer system. So that will be some significant revenues there for the sewer fund. Looking down 500, the water fund. Again, it is in good shape. We started the year with $287,000, ending the year in cash $397,000. So, very much improved there. Down to 600, the electric and telecommunications fund. We had cash, again here, we began the year with $5.8 million, ended the year with $5 million. We have encumbrance of about, slightly under $1 million, which I'm sure has to do with purchase power. That's, the good rule of thumb in the electric fund. So $4 million free and clear. The number dropped in the cash balance. That was intentional. Of course, now we're looking at what is the optimum balance to have in the electric fund. I'm not going to steal anyone else's thunder, but that's intentional on the part of the city. Again, looking at hospitalization, 715. Again, having $616,000 in cash in the hospitalization fund. So, again, looking at possible suspension of 1 month's payment. We started balance in the treasury of $14,800,000, ended with 15.2. That's largely with the ARPA funds that we did not anticipate. So, and that revenue was line 284. That was revenues of $473,000. So again, that's gives you an idea why we have that large jump in the balance in the treasury. On the second page, again, we have the comparisons. I'm not going to go over those. Down at the bottom, though, we look at the income tax. We can see that individual income tax, looking at the 3-year average, was up 8.6%. That's very good. Withholding was up 5.8%. Again, that is good. We see the business, and again, we have those 2 outlier estimates that jack that up. So, the number is what it is, but we can't do any comparison because of those 2 extraordinary payments. The next page, again, we see the comparison of utilities. In the middle, we have certain expenditures of all the funds. The wages were up 4% over the year, hospitalization up 2% over the year, purchase power up 3%, and then the administrative cost, which is down $2,300 or 0.2%. Looking at income tax revenues, clear down at the bottom. In 2020, the refunds were $38,500. This last year, they were almost $72,000. Who knows what they'll be this year? But again, we are planning for some extraordinary refunds. Next page is the cash investment reconciliation. We can see, if you look at the column at the top labeled the PNC Bank, of course that's the bank that is planning to close. You can see that we have $7.8 million there as of the end of the year. That's considerable, friends. When you figure the total is 15.2, so it's a little under half is in one financial institution. Now some of those are maybe in some CDs and things. Well, actually I don't see any there, but, we'll see where it goes. One would think that any financial institution would say, if some customer says, I have $7.8 million, would you like it in your bank? You would think that a bank manager would do cartwheels for that. Well, it's not that simple. And the issue is that in the state of Ohio, there is a law that financial institutions must collateralize public dollars to the tune of 100%. It is protection for the taxpayers. And, I think there are some financial institutions, whether they don't care to collateralize to 100%, they don't want to be bothered. It makes no sense to me. Again, if I were a branch manager, I would love to have that, because I can go to my boss and say, look at the new money I've brought into my bank, but it's not that simple. So I know that the finance director and deputy will be dutiful in looking at this. We are fortunate to have the number of financial institutions we have in this community. We can shop around with our monies. I think of Shiloh, just this last year, the Savista branch closed. Plymouth has but one. You get into any number of these small villages, and they don't have the flexibility that we have. But that's the situation we're looking at, is the collateralization requirement that's very different. So the finance director did note that there was a $400 of interest from a U.S. Treasury bond that was not posted in 2021. The books closed. That's 2021 revenue that will be posted in 2022. It happens. So the next page, of course, shows the Edward Jones for the, or actually the Sutter Roush. So, Mayor, that is, I think, everything on my notes and my scratchings here on the report. If anyone has any questions about the financial statement, I'll be glad to defer those to the finance director.
Are there any comments or questions for Mr. Gates or Mr. Crum? Mr. Gates.
Mayor, I move that the combined financial statement and the cash investment and reconciliation statement, both as of 12/31/2021, be received, placed on file, and posted to the city's website.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Roberts that the combined financial statement and the cash investment reconciliation statement, both dated 12/31/2021, be received, placed on file, and posted to the city website. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Robb?
Yay.
Mr. Roberts? Yay. Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
That motion passes. Thank you, Councilman Gates.
Mayor, you're welcome.
Move then to the Utilities and Streets Committee met, and in Councilman Morgan's absence, I believe Councilman McLaughlin is going to give that report.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Utility and Streets Committee, we met on January 13th. So the first item I'd like to talk about is our street paving project update for 2022. So the list of streets in the 2022 paving project, 4 streets are Marvin Avenue, West Street, Samantha Drive, and Devonshire Court. Engineering is working to complete the paving project estimate, and the project expenses to be covered by the Fund 353. If the schedule stays on course, the paving project legislation bid should be prepared for next month or early March. Street to be paved outside the paving project bidding process is Washington Street, right there behind the vault. It's a concrete surface street, it's pretty bad shape, so they'll have to mill 2.5 to 3 inches of concrete and apply tack coating, tar and chip. Project expenses be covered by either Fund 200, 210, 353. The next item we talked about were electric vehicles. So electric vehicle popularity is growing, so the city has an EV toolkit placed on the city website to provide information on numerous topics considering electric vehicles. So the toolkit on the website includes the following: why consider buying an EV, vehicle list and costs, federal tax credits associated with a particular EV, the range, where and how to charge an EV battery, how long does it take to charge a battery, and how many miles can it go on the charge. Next item we talked about is the electric cash reserve policy. So Mr. Ensman's drafted a reserve policy at this point, which proposed recommended minimum cash reserve of $4.5 million. The reserve was calculated to financially support a 3-month cost projection for distribution, manufacturing, maintenance, office operations, and purchase power. Also fixed amounts for capital expenditures and catastrophic events in the tune of $1 million estimated for catastrophic events. A quote to ensure the electric distribution system is being populated by our insurance agent. The quote will provide the cost to insure the system and the associated policy deductible. This information will help provide the necessary financials to firm up the decision for the catastrophic event amount in the recommended minimum cash reserve policy. Next, we talked about the electric fund balance. The redesign to lower the fund balance from $6.5 million to the proposed $4.5 million. And as Mr. Gates discussed, we're at $5 million at this point, $5,006,000 to be exact. We're nearing our financial goal at this point for the electric fund balance. The balance levelization rate rider, at its inception, May of 2019 through November 2021, $441,031.48 has been attributed to that. The second reading to cease the credit will be presented tonight at this meeting. So the balance levelization and COVID relief equates to $749,031.48 of the fund balance reduction. That's all I have tonight, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember McLaughlin. Are there any comments or questions from Mr. McLaughlin in regard to his report? All right, hearing none, we'll move on then to the Safety Committee. Councilman Roberts.
Thank you, sir. Safety Committee met on January 6th at City Hall. We began with the police news, and Chief Combs reported that the Richland County Jail is scaling back who they will accept due to COVID. Violent felons, they'll take them in, or violent offenders, they'll take those in, but they're going to be really picky about who goes into the Richland County Jail. So with that, Shelby Jail is going to remain open, but mandatory violations only. So all other arrests, said, will be dealt with by summons, and main concern is to minimize infection to the staff. We've had an issue with that, and we do not want to go back to that. So jail electronic visitation modules are down. In-person monitored visitation is being used until the issue is resolved. Have to have visitation in the jail, so the electronic worked out nice, but it's not working out at all right now. So we have to let them come in and visit. So low staffing is still a concern. Candidates are not meeting the requirements for hire. The police department is in a similar situation with the fire department, as we talked about in my last report. And we'll have to set some creative ways on how to become fully staffed. And the chief is working on that right now, so in the very near future, I think we'll hear some news of how we're going to get that going. 3 radios in dispatch are on the marked system, but there's no timeline on when the rest will be complete. New training program is being looked at, which could find our officers taking Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu classes. It's a grappling art instead of a striking art, and it's found to be more safe, is found to more safely subdue individuals, and we're in the early stages of that process. So that's the thing, you know, instead of having to hit somebody to subdue them, you know, the grappling will be safer, we think, we hope. So, both fire and police news, we had the Spread the Light kickoff. That was held on Sunday the 9th, and it was well received. There were, I was surprised at the different departments that came out. There were a lot of departments there, and toward the end, well, I didn't stick around to eat because I didn't eat that kind of stuff, but they went out and they all turned on their lights. It was impressive. I mean, there was a lot of, and as a matter of fact, I commented, boy, social media is gonna eat this up, and by golly, by the time I got home, what's going on? That rocket, you know, there's a bunch of police and fire out there, you know. So, but, you know, it was Spread the Light, it was a good thing. Light bulbs were passed out, red and blue, so you can put them up and support the police and fire departments. So, moving on to fire, we have one position open, as Mr. Gates said. There were a lot of applicants, and they were going to be interviewing that first interview last week. So, talked about it before, but it's time in the fire department, we really need to start talking about buying another ambulance. At some point in the future, Chief Thompson wants it to be in the near future, we'd like to take over EMS. And to do that, we're gonna have another ambulance, and not like, you know, the 38 is a van style. It's not suitable for what we need, and it's old anyway. We couldn't use that one, but we're gonna have to buy something similar to the one that we bought, in the last one we bought, 39. And so, you know, he's gonna start looking at that. You know, everybody's looking for ambulances. If we could fall into something like we did last time, that we bought a demo, that would be great. But Chief says everybody's looking for that demo because they're cheaper. So, but you know, we're going to keep pushing ahead with that and trying to figure something out, because we're going to need that soon. And both the dependent funds, the Volunteer Peace Officers Dependent Fund and the Volunteer Firefighters Dependent Fund, both those boards met and they are set up. And that's the only time we want to meet ever, is at the beginning of the year when when we set it up. So that went well. And in Health Department news, really the only real thing that was talked about is the one nuisance that had been turned over to the water. That's my report.
Thank you, Councilman Roberts. Are there any comments or questions for Mr. Roberts in regard to his report? No, we thank you.
Thank you.
Move on to reports of city officials. I really have no long report this evening. We do have an application with submit for your approval of Councilman Gates to the Community Reinvestment Area Housing Council.
I move to confirm the appointment of Garland John Gates to the Community Reinvestment and Housing Council.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by Mr. Roberts and a second by Mr. McLaughlin to confirm the appointment of Garland John Gates to the Community Reinvestment Area Housing Council. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Robb?
Yay.
Mr. Roberts?
Yay.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Motion to confirm passes. Thank you, gentlemen. Are there any questions for me? I don't know, maybe not a report or anything. All right, we'll move on then to Mr. Brian Crum, Director of Finance.
Thank you, sir. Well, first of all, I apologize for my absence last council meeting for my little COVID quarantine. Luckily, all is well. Thank you for being so kind to Amber and helping her get through that. She did a fabulous job. We are incredibly busy this time of year, wrapping up all of 2021 and doing all of the year-end reports for a zillion different organizations, as well as getting it into gear for tax season and the audit. We've just got in contact with the state auditor about beginning that, and so we are really busy. Nothing is too surprising right at this point. I did just get the results from the audit insurance company. If you guys recall from last year, we wanted an outside firm to look over our policy to make sure that we're covered for everything and that everything is fair. And then after we review it, we decide we want to put out a bid or anything, we can do that. So that just came in today, so I will get you guys all a copy of that. And I'm sure we'll talk about it in the next finance committee. So we can do, but pretty much that is my report.
Are there any comments or questions for Mr. Crum in regard to his report? I may have one, just kind of thought about Mr. Gates mentioned the appropriations meetings. And maybe look back at last year's calendar. Did we talk about that, maybe set a couple dates ahead, or were you going to wait till you had some more figures to work with?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I am, obviously, due to health, I didn't, not quite as far as I'd like to be. I'm hoping the next couple days to have my spreadsheet all set up. And I know that at least the utility departments and the police department, they've been really working to get me numbers, and I expect to see them pretty soon here. And those two are a vast majority of our total appropriations. So I'd like to have a lot of the numbers entered by the end of the month, so that early February we can sit down and start hashing it out. But
No pressure. I just, I think it worked out well last year. I think we didn't paint ourselves into a corner. We had time to really go through things and give careful thought. So we'll try to get through it. You and I work together on that. Very good. Thank you. Mr. Eister, Law Director.
Thank you, Mayor. I just thought to Mr. Roberts' statement around the health department nuisance, I think that complaint's been drafted. Since we were closed Monday, so I don't know if Beth was down to sign that stuff or not, but it's in the pipeline. We filed. Other than that, no report.
Okay, thank you. Are there any comments or questions for Mr. Eister? Hearing none, move on to Mr. Geis, Project Coordinator.
Thank you, Mayor. Excuse me, as you can see through town, the lead service line project is progressing. As expected, there were a few new ones that no one knew or whatever, so there's a few added, so it did take a couple days longer in a certain area, but they will be moving on down the road. We opened up bids for the Black Fork Commons last Friday. There were 2 bids submitted, and both of them well over the engineer's estimates. So back to the drawing board there. Several things, some value engineering, throwing more money at it, cut things out, or both, or all 3. So we do have a meeting with our engineer on Friday to see what the story is and see where we can go from there. For our traffic signal project, materials have been approved and they are ordered. As we know with all the other problems, projects and getting materials, so we'll see where that goes and when they'll get started. As we do remember, Ray Lucheski has since retired. His license is no longer. He's done enough. But I did call him and he was off to the ski slope, so he's enjoying his retirement. So FE Croca does have another engineer. His name is Matt Hassel, so I will forward you on his contact information to do those services for us. So that's all I have there.
Thank you, Mr. Geis. Are there any comments or questions for Mr. Geis? Mr. Gates.
Mayor, I'm wondering about the house on East Main Street that burned a few months ago. What might be happening there?
Mr. Geis.
The owner has a contractor ready to tear it down. Only thing waiting on now is Columbia Gas to take the service out at the road. So that way there's no explosion. The contractor is ready to go as soon as that's done, and go from there.
That's very good news. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Geis.
I will say, just to make a comment, when council passed that ordinance of keeping some of the fire proceeds, it's worked very well. There's a house on Shelby Avenue, just finished back up getting So we'll refund those monies, and houses previous, when you hold a little bit of their proceeds, they seem to want to get it done quicker. So it was a good move by council to do that, and it's working very well.
Very good, thank you. All right, move forward then to new business. There is no new business listed on the agenda, but is there any new business from council this evening? Hearing none, we'll move forward then to unfinished business. And the future use of Main Street Fire Station continues to be unfinished, and there's no movement on that matter. Is there any other unfinished business to be brought before council? Hearing none, we'll move forward then to legislation. Mr. Crum?
Ordinance number 1, 2022, amending chapter 1050 electricity, section 1050.02, rates and charges for service, D, balance levelization rate rider of the codified ordinances of the city of Shelby, Ohio.
Move for second reading.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Roberts and a second by Mr. Gates for the second reading of ordinance number 1, 2022. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Rob?
Yay.
Mr. Roberts?
Yay.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Ordinance number 1, 2022 passes the second reading.
Ordinance number 2, 2022, amending section 206.02, boundaries of wards of chapter 206, wards and boundaries of the codified ordinances of the city of Shelby.
Move for second reading.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Roberts for the second reading of ordinance number 2, 2022. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Rob?
Yay.
Mr. Roberts?
Yay.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Ordinance number 2, 2022 passes the second reading.
Resolution number 2, 2022, authorizing the mayor as Director of Public Safety to participate in the Johnson & Johnson National Opioid Settlement and declaring an emergency.
Move the resolution be taken up and passed.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Roberts for the passage of resolution number 2, 2022. Discussion? Mr. Gates?
Mayor, we had passed a resolution earlier, or at some point last year. It was with, this one was with Johnson & Johnson. It was with someone else. I can't remember who it was, but again, the state wanting municipalities to join in with this and seeing what might happen.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Rob?
Yay.
Mr. Roberts?
Yay.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Resolution number 2, 2022 passes. Now come to miscellaneous business. Anyone have any miscellaneous business to be brought before council? Mr. Gates?
Mayor, I want to thank the street crews for the wonderful job they did. When I'm in bed and the snow is falling, it's like music to my ears when I hear those plows go down 4th Street. And, you know, I haven't been in any other community. I know that Ashland County got much more snow than we did, but again, music to my ears. I can roll over and go back to sleep after I'm awakened by the plow. So if either you or Mr. Ensman will share, I think I speak for my colleagues, you know, to share our thanks with the street crews.
Mr. Rob?
In line with Councilman Gates' comments about the good job that the street department is doing, and just a reminder that residents and businesses have an obligation to clear snow also.
It's about time for that reminder, yes. Sidewalks in, I think it's a reasonable time, I think, out there in the street somewhere. Yes, you're right. So it's a good reminder. We'll probably be putting that out there. We commended Superintendent Mr. Shepherd this morning at our meeting. This is exactly what you said. I was in 2 nearby adjacent municipalities, and there was a marked difference, especially in one of them, between Shelby Street and the streets and others. I'm not making that city. Okay. All right, does anyone other miscellaneous business? Mr. Gates.
Mayor, I move council adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Roberts for adjournment. Roll call, please.
Mr. Rob?
Yay.
Mr. Roberts?
Yay.
Mr. Gates?
Yeah.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yeah.
Council adjourns at 7:43.
I know, who would have thought?
Chief, I need to bend your ear for a minute.
Thank you for our.
Well, I-